There was once a wise professor who loved to teach valuable life lessons to his students. One day he brought a big jar and placed it on the table in front of his curious students. He pulled out a bag of big rocks and carefully placed them one by one until they reached the top of the jar. With a mischievous grin, he asked the students, "Is this jar full?" They all glanced at the jar and confidently shouted, "Yes!" The professor shook his head and said, "Not so fast." He reached under the table and pulled out a bag filled with small rocks. Carefully, he poured the rocks into the jar and they tumbled down, filling the gaps between the larger rocks. He asked again, "Now is the jar full?" The students, a bit wiser this time, hesitated and replied, "Well, maybe not." The professor nodded and grinned again. This time, he pulled out a bag of pebbles and poured them into the jar. The pebbles made their way through the spaces between the rocks, settling at the bottom. "Now, is it full?" the professor asked, raising an eyebrow. The students, catching on, were cautious with their answer. "Probably not," they murmured. The professor, enjoying the suspense, took out a bag of sand and poured it into the jar. The sand seeped through the gaps left by the rocks and pebbles, filling every available space. "Now, my dear students, is the jar full?" The students, feeling a little wary, glanced at each other and responded, "Definitely not." With a twinkle in his eyes, the professor reached for a pitcher of water and poured it into the jar, saturating the sand. The jar was finally brimming with water. He smiled at the astonished students and explained, "The jar represents your life. The big rocks symbolize the most important things: your family, your health, your passions. The pebbles represent the other essential elements like your career, your friendships, and your hobbies. And the sand and water represents the small stuff, the everyday tasks and minor details. The lesson here is that if you start by filling your jar with the small stuff like the sand and water, there won't be room for the bigger, more important things. But if you prioritize and put the big rocks first, everything else will fit in around them," the professor concluded. The students nodded, realizing the significance of the lesson. They learned that to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, they needed to identify their priorities and focus on what truly mattered, rather than getting bogged down by trivial matters. And so, armed with this newfound wisdom, the students left the class, ready to arrange their jars of life with the big rocks taking center stage and the sand finding its place in the nooks and crannies. Just like the jar filled with big rocks, pebbles, sand and water, our lives are a delicate balance of priorities and choices. Remember, it's essential to identify the big rocks in your life, the things that truly matter to you, and prioritize them above all else. Thank you for joining us for this inspiring tale of the wise professor and his valuable life lesson. If you enjoyed this story and the valuable lesson it brings, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel so you never miss our future videos filled with inspiration and wisdom.